Serbs aren't jealous that the Albanians are getting all this money from the UK government to process the people who are washing up on the shores of southern England. The Serbs aren't saying, hey, we wish we'd been cut in on that deal too, are they? This seems to be the way now. The EU bribed the Turks, they want to bribe Belarus, and now Britain's bribing Albania.
No, I think that Serbia is part of that Eastern European independent group of nations where they just don't want to join the madness of the West. They're very independent. And I think you could put them in the Poland bloc and Hungary bloc, where they're kind of looking on in complete amazement. And, you know, I think you've written about it before. You go into Serbia, a Serbian restaurant, and you're served by a Serbian waiter. You walk, you know, you go to a Serbian coffee shop with the Serbian behind the counter. I was just talking to a Croatian woman there, and she was saying she was in Sweden recently, and it was all East Europeans who were serving her coffee, working in the bars, and she felt she wasn't a tourist at all. She wasn't. That Europe, you know, globalization means that there is no countries anymore. There is no unique place.
No, that's what I find so sad. I mean, particularly with relation to things like Ireland, I don't really see the point of 1922 or anything, because if you're in a coffee shop in Dublin, it's exactly the same as in a coffee shop in Belfast or a coffee shop in Glasgow or in London, and everybody who's serving you comes from somewhere else. We've all multiculturalism, diversity has made us all the same. But since we brought up Ireland, Phelim, let me ask you this. There was a very cynical, famously rather cynical remark. I think it was genuine on his part, by Reggie Maudling, the British Home Secretary, that they thought they could hold things down to, quote, an acceptable level of violence. When it comes to the global jihad, basically Boris and Priti Patel and everyone have figured the same thing. Yeah, these things are going to happen. We're going to hold it down to an acceptable level of violence. Every so often, your kid will go to a pop concert at the Manchester Arena and won't come home again. But it's not going to happen enough that people get mad at us to do something about it. Is that parallel between Reggie Maudling and the way governments think now valid?
Totally. They wanted to keep it in Northern Ireland. And, you know, you noticed if you went to England with bombs, very often you came back in a box or you were sent to prison for the rest of your natural life. It was about everyone knew that if you went on a bombing mission in England, you probably would be shot trying to escape. That was the deal. And it worked, and the acceptable level of violence. But Margaret Thatcher, it was brought home to her in Brighton in 1983 what that meant. And then, mysteriously, suddenly there was lots of shoot-to-kills in Northern Ireland, regardless of what you thought about them. Margaret Thatcher realised that the acceptable level of violence, that people are unpredictable, and that it was going to be difficult to contain this. And I think with the international jihadist movement, an acceptable level of violence ain't going to cut it.
Well, and there's another difference too, isn't it? What was happening during the Troubles took place within a relatively stable population and amongst relatively small numbers. I mean, I think it was MI5 who calculated at one point that there were no more than 100 active members of the IRA. They tied down an awful lot of law enforcement with just 100 members. MI5 have already said there are actually tens of thousands of radicalized people in the United Kingdom right now, and a whole bunch are showing up to some degree or another, simply because we have no idea who these people are. Every day on the beaches of southern England, there's, you know, this week there's been over 1,000 on one day. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows who the people on the Polish-Belarusian border are. So isn't it, in a sense, isn't Belfast always looked like a bit of a Sunday school picnic by comparison with any other so-called war zone. But isn't it actually right now, we just don't know what we're letting ourselves in for with the scale of this thing?
Well, don't forget, Belfast had walls too. Even small as Belfast had walls to keep people from killing each other, and still has those walls in Little Belfast, where the difference between the two communities is a Hail Mary and the Pope. You know, that they're both Christians, and so don't forget.
Let me just ask you about that, Phelan, because it's an excellent point. I mean, you guys, in the scheme of things, you think you're fundamentally different from your neighbours. To anyone looking from like 20 miles away, they're thinking, what the hell are these guys? They're both, there's barely a discernible difference. So we have, Protestant loyalists and Catholic Republicans. It would be absurd to think they could exist in the same territory. But apparently, if you add in, Sudanese genital mutilation practitioners and Somali warlords and all the rest of it, then you've just got multicultural diversity, and that's fine. That's going to be fine.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. We managed to try and kill each other for 30 years over the most minor differences, that's a simplification to a certain extent, but really we watched the same TV. We almost studied the same curriculum at school. One side had more emphasis on Irish history, the other had more emphasis on British history, but really it was so slim. The idea that you can't have a civil war and a vicious war with people who are very similar, but imagine when they're very, very, very separate. That could lead to a lot of trouble, and that is leading to a lot of trouble. And it's showing you the dark side of multiculturalism.